So this is divine principle creation 1, with the understanding that we are living at the dawn of a new era. It's necessary that we look into how we teach divine principle, especially the content. And I would like to introduce some of the very important understanding that true parents have introduced, that I think is critical that we have this included in the principle of creation. So the fundamental questions of our life cannot be answered if we don't reach out to the understanding of God. Questions like, why is there suffering? Who am I? What is the purpose of life? So these are questions that are what we call fundamental questions, and all generations, regardless of whether we are old or young, will somehow encounter and ask those fundamental questions. We have to understand that science provide answers to how questions, even though many times we ask why, but actually science deal with basically how things happen, not why things happen. So that's very important to distinguish. So science has its role, and religion and philosophy has its role as well. So I will continue. So all the problems that we face in life, we have to understand that we are resultant being. So we need to reach out to the causal being. And we need to understand the nature of God. When we talk about nature of God, who is God? What is the essence of God? And related question is, who am I? And a very important question that many young people today are asking more than the purpose of life is, what is my true identity? So how do we know the nature of God? Because the nature of God is invisible. Well, by observing his creation, we say. Just like we may not know the character and personality of the artist, but through his works, we can more or less find out the character and personality of the artist. In the same way, if God is the cause and we are the creation, the effect, then by looking at common characteristics that is present in this creation, we can come to understand God in many ways. So that's why in Romans 1:20, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. So we notice that we are going to introduce the internal character and external form that we see in creation. The internal nature and the matter and shape and structure of everything that is in this universe. So we notice that there is an internal character and there is an external form in all creation. Let's look at the 5 categories of creation. And through understanding this, we can come to understand who God is. If you look at the 5 categories of creation, there's particles, the atoms, molecule, So the molecules, atoms, and particle will have the physical, chemical properties. And then we have the plant, animals, and man. So the molecules, atoms, and particles are what we call the mineral world. Okay, you find that even in elementary particle, there is some kind of inherent nature that made that what that particle is, whether it's electron, proton, neutron. And of course, the more so-called bodily part is the energy. It's not something physical, but it's energy. So we can say that the inherent directive nature of the particle is like the mind, and the body is consisting of energy. And when we move to the next level of creation, you'll find that atoms also consist of particles. Okay, so the particle becomes the body. Okay, and then there is an inherent nature. We know that there are 93 natural elements, and each of these elements has some kind of design or some kind of inherent directive nature that make what it is that is unique. Of course, we have created also other elements as well. Okay. Now, the atoms now become the body when you look at molecules. And the molecules, whether you're talking about water molecule, which is 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, there is some kind of inherent directive nature as well, the design aspect. And then there is a body aspect consisting of atoms. Okay, so the mineral kingdom consumed by the plants form the body, the cells, the tissues. But then there's the plant mind. All we know is that, interestingly, you put a pot of plant in a room, you will seek for sunlight. That's the mind of the plant, or the roots that go down and seek for water. And then you move up to the next category of creation, you find that, yeah, there's a body and also animal mind, which is instinctive mind. Okay, and then we also have body, but we have much more than the mind of animals and plants and the mineral kingdom. Okay, we have heart and mind. Okay, and what's important from this is that when we go to the next level, since these are all the common characteristics of internal character, external form, God must have created with also the internal character and external form, because God is the first cause. And when we look at God and man, God is the heart and mind, and man is the body, even though man has heart and mind. But when you look at the relationship of God and human beings and man, heart and mind is the very essence of God. And we can go so far as to say later on to explain that heart is the most essential character, or essential, the essence of God's personality. And heart is also the most essential, the essence of our personality as well. Okay. And God dwells in our heart, So heart is, in that sense, a very important aspect of our mind that we ignored. And because of that, you can see we have all kinds of problems. So when we look at God's, there is an original external character, which is the body of God, which consists of universal prime energy. And those who are interested, 95% is dark energy and matter. And that is the universal prime energy. and 5% is what we call known energy in this world, in this universe. But the original internal character of God consists of heart, is essence of God's personality and character, and emotion, intellect, and will, concepts, and law. As we already stated, heart is the essence of God's personality. And the relationship between the original internal character and original external character, original external form, is that it is in harmonious reciprocal relationship with one another. They don't exist independently. Okay. Now let's move on. Now, when we look at man, without going into details, okay, what is the relationship of the intellect, emotion, and will that we mentioned earlier, and heart? Heart is actually, as I mentioned, the essence of who we are. But there's so much emphasis on intellect, and emotion is considered the, base, regarded lower than intellect in so many ways. But how was supposed to be expressed through the emotion. So I would like just to say that there is much more in our mind than just our intellect, much more than our brain, because when we talk about heart, we're not talking about just the physical heart, but we are talking about the heart of our mind. Yeah. Now we move on to what is the deepest relationship, since happiness, joy and happiness is dependent very much on what we call relationship. Happiness comes from relationship. And God created this universe also so as to experience joy and happiness. But what is the deepest relationship that God wanted to establish when he created, especially created man, Adam and Eve? We say that the most deepest relationship is parent and child. Parent and child, which we say is the secret of the universe. So we can say that this relationship of parent and child can bring about the greatest joy and happiness, or it can bring grief and sorrow to God and to mankind, Adam and Eve, and the descendants of Adam and Eve. So that is the understanding of relationship between God and Adam and Eve and humankind. So originally, God wanted to establish this wonderful relationship where joy and happiness can come about. But what is this joy and happiness dependent on? Well, in Asian society, the family particularly and relationship is based on ethics, yeah? And one key, you could say, value that has kept the family intact for so many thousands of years is the understanding of filial piety. So filial piety is the virtue exhibiting the proper love and respect for one's parents, elders, and ancestors, okay? But however, filial piety is one direction in terms of the child in the object partner position to parent in the subject partner position. It is the expectation that children demonstrate filial piety towards their parent. And we know that because this is just one direction, young people today are no longer accepting filial piety as the very basis of relationship between them and their parent. Yeah. So that's why it's necessary to look at a relationship based on filial piety, but on filial heart. Now, it's interesting that one of the biggest revolution that Jesus brought was when he called God Heavenly Father. Now, Confucianism doesn't have a personal God, but heaven for the Chinese is Tian, is basically this character, but two person. This is two, and this is Ren, this is two person. But what is important is that Jesus revolutionized this relationship when he said that God is our Heavenly Father. So when he said that God is our Heavenly Father, that changed the fundamental relationship between us and God. Okay. Now, another very important proclamation was on January the 7th, 2013, when Dr. Haja Hamoon, as True Mother, declared that we should call God Heavenly Parent. So moving into Heavenly Parent means there is a Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. So there is a father and motherly characteristic in God. Yeah. And here we say that the filial piety that we should demonstrate towards God should be based on filial heart, based on attendance. I cannot go into detail about what attendance is. And corresponding to this attendance to God that we should have in that relationship with our Heavenly Parent is that God has absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience towards Adam and Eve, the first man and woman. Yeah. Absolute obedience in terms of principle. Yeah. And I cannot go into detail to explain what is absolute faith and absolute love and absolute obedience at this stage. But it's a very important understanding that God is our Heavenly Parent. So we are then, who are we then? If God is our Heavenly Parent, we are meant to be, Adam and Eve, if they had united in heart, should have been the sons and daughters of God. There's no higher position than sons and daughters of God. And that relationship is based on filial heart or filial affection. Okay, very important understanding. And so we come now to the question for those who would like to talk about existence of God. Well, from the artistic perspective, how to explain that there is a definitely God exists. We say that, you know, if we look at life, there is lineage and conscience, and there's love. You know them because you sense them with your mind. It's not something that you intellectually, come to understand. But you come to know life, conscience, and love because you sense them with your mind. You sense them. You know that is important. A similar logic applies to the question of whether God exists or whether a person can see God. Anyone can recognize God and confirm that he exists. Once God comes into your heart knows him. So God is something that is a being that we should know. It's not something that you can prove intellectually. You know that God exists. But something must have happened at the time of Adam and Eve that resulted in this separation of God and humankind. Okay, but the existence of God, here again, if you intellectualize yourself and want to use the intellect to come to understand God, intellect is not the faculty to reach to God. It is your heart. Okay. And then if you look at basically what science have demonstrated, especially in understanding of the Big Bang, and there is one point or singularity that everything that we see in this universe come from 13.7 billion years ago, the Big Bang, and resulted in time and space and physical life. This is the physical reality. So the Big Bang really demonstrated, there is an origin. There is origin, okay? And how life evolved, that's another question altogether, okay? But there is an origin of the Big Bang. And then the other part, the biological science, have shown that all men come from one woman because of what we call the mitochondria Eve, okay? Every one of us, when we look at a DNA, all comes from one woman, which many scientists believe that woman must have originated from Africa. But if you look at origin, whether you're talking about life or man, or whether you're talking about this whole universe, there is this understanding that there is an origin, and the quite interestingly conform with the understanding in the Bible that there is a first man and first woman. So this is the presentation I'd like to share. That is the first presentation on principle of creation to introduce a very important understanding that God is our heavenly parent. We are sons and daughters of God, meant to be sons and daughters of God, and that the relationship should have been based on filial heart or filial affection. Thank you very much.